Hello, this is Peter Bostwick from You Can Choose, and I'm joined today by Rusty from Silicon Valley Dreambuilders and Beth Bostwick from You Can Choose. And what we're doing is we're putting together a series of discussions to talk about leadership. Now, everybody talks about leadership, but what's so special about us? Well, you'll hear what's so special about us. We're talking about it from a different perspective. Very, very strong way of coming about it. So listen to us. The first time we had our conversation, it was about self-leadership. You might want to go back and listen to that. It was a very informative way of looking at how you're leading yourself because you are your own boss. The second one we talked about was courage. And going along with courage is fear. And we talk a lot about fear and how that works as you as a leader. Today, we're going to be talking about grit and failing fast. That's going to be exciting. I'm glad you're listening to us. And then next week, we're going to be talking about networking and what that's all about, how your network leads to leadership. So today, let's kick it off and talk about grit and feeling fast. So the first question I'll do is I'll turn it over to Rusty. Rusty, why don't you introduce yourself just a little bit and tell us a little bit more about Silicon Valley Dreambuilders and what the heck is grit?
Yes, thanks, Peter. Thanks for the introduction. So I am Rusty Gaillard, and I started Silicon Valley Dreambuilders a little over a year ago after 25 years in various corporate roles, and most recently 13 years at Apple. And I started Silicon Valley Dreambuilders because I wanted to help people get unstuck. I felt stuck in my career for a long time doing work that was good work, but it wasn't fulfilling for me. There was something missing. And so many people, I think, go through life just kind of toughing it out, waiting for things to get better. And, I can't tell you how many people I talk to who are a little bit more advanced in their career, who are just waiting for retirement. They're just like, I'm just going to tough it out until I retire. Or, people who just say, I don't really have any choice because I need to do this, I need to make the money and all of that. So when we talk about grit, in a way you can say that's applying grit, right? Because grit is it's like a character trait of being able to tough it out and stick with it and keep going and be persistent and stay engaged even when it feels challenging. So you could say that that is grit, but I have, and maybe it is, but it still feels like it's like applying it in the wrong way to me. It's like, do you really want to tough it out in a situation that's not a good one? Isn't it a much better application of grit or persistence or, sticking with it if you're going after something that's really meaningful and important to you?
Perfect. That's great. I appreciate that. It's a good way of looking at grit, kind of challenging it even. So Beth, tell us a little about you and what you got going on and what the heck grit means to you.
So just briefly, Peter and I are entrepreneurs. We started multiple software companies multiple companies in Silicon Valley, and exited and decided we really wanted to talk to the world about how important your thinking is. And so that's why we started You Can Choose. And as Rusty's talking about grit, I'm thinking to myself, wow, that's really certainly an application of grit, about sticking with it even on something you don't like. But we're really talking about it relative to what it is you do want in life. And that's really where I think grit's really important, for sticking with things that you really believe in, that are very important to you, that you really feel are your contribution to the world. That's really the application of grit, I think, that we're talking about. But you certainly could apply grit and just like gritting and bearing, I think, and toughing it out. But that's really not what we're talking about here. We're really talking about being persistent, especially in the face of people telling you that what you're doing isn't that important, or they don't think you have value, but you really believe it. And that, to me, is a really key point about grit.
It's all, you guys are actually talking about essentially two sides of grit. One is gritting it out when people don't believe in you, and the other is gritting it out when you think you just need to do the work to make it happen. Is that what you see, Rusty?
I do see that, and the grit has become popular, I think, as a social term or as a personality trait. I don't know what quite the right word is, but in the last couple of years, it's become popular for that. And I do think that people apply that and they're like, yeah, I've got grit. I'm toughing it out, man. I'm working 14-hour days or whatever that is. And, you know, in some ways, I have friends who have come from the banking industry, and there's an element of this in high tech too, which is like, it's almost a badge of honor. Like, you know, I was here until 2 o'clock in the morning last night and we're working so hard. And, you know, it's almost an accolade that, you know, I've got that degree of commitment, of that grit that I'm going to stick with, and I've got that much drive and energy. And the drive and energy is great, but I still come back to this question of, why are you doing it?
Perfect. That's great. So when you think about the grit and being able to go for it, what's the opposite of having that level of grit? And let's look at it not so much with working really late into the night, but looking at it in terms of persevering. Like, let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're working on something and it's just not working out so well, or you're at a company and you're waiting for a promotion, or you're waiting for an opportunity that's not there. When do you decide to in your head to say, enough is enough? I'm going down this pathway far enough and I'm not getting the results that I want. It's time for me to do something else, whether you call it failing, or you call it pivoting, or you call it making a career change. When do you do something like that, Beth?
Ooh, good question. So yes, I never knew how to answer this question until just a few years ago. And it really goes back to, how are you feeling? And one of the earlier discussions, we talked about stopping to check in to make sure that you're still on the right path. And that is the thing that's really important. So I very much agree with what Rusty was saying, that there's a badge of honor and just like grinning and bearing it. But the sad thing is, you lose when you do that. If you're not really don't really have a lot of grit around something you're really passionate about, then you're probably not very happy, and maybe you need an accolade to make yourself feel better because you're working on something you really don't want to. But I think if you're really cognizant of what's important to you and you really apply grit in that sense, that's when you get the real positive vibes out there. You get the energy, you rejuvenate yourself, I think, in a lot of ways, even though it might be really difficult, but you know you're doing something that you really want to do. And there's a huge difference between those two.
I'd love to build on that a little bit. And I totally agree with what you're saying, Beth. And the way I want to build on that is that I talk to a lot of people who, when I ask them what they want more of in their life, it tends to be things like money, free time, retirement, these kinds of things. But really what they're speaking to is this desire for freedom. They're speaking to this desire to do the things that they want in their life. I'm like, well, so what if you have money? So what if you have free time? Then what are you going to do? Because all those things do is enable you to do something that you want to do. And that element of freedom, I want to tie that back again into this question of, why are you doing what it is that you're doing? Right? Even as an entrepreneur, if you're launching a business, clearly entrepreneurs believe in what they're doing, right? No entrepreneur would be doing this if they didn't. And you go back to, why do I believe in this? What is important to this about me? How does it align with my values as a person and the kind of impact I want to have on this life, in my life? And I think those are important things to look at, because some part of this is just, I want to be successful. And that's fine, but is that really in the end of your life going to provide meaning for you? Or is it, hey, I want to touch people, I want to make people's lives better, I want to enable some segment of the population to do something that otherwise maybe they couldn't do. So it's just continuing to dig into, why is it that you're doing what you're doing? And as Beth was saying, when you're reflecting on a decision point, when you're in that point and you have to decide, am I on the right path? That why is so important, and just to keep going layers and layers into that to really understand how and why you're doing it.
Exactly, you're right on. It's nothing to me, and I guess to us even. There's almost nothing more important than A, knowing what you want, and B, knowing why you want it. And unless because both of us have been entrepreneurs and started our own company and gone through all the highs and the hells and the lows and the dales of making that work. And if you don't have the why you're doing it underneath it, and it can't just be to be successful, it's got to be something else that's driving you to make that happen. If you don't have that behind you, you're not going to either know when to throw in the towel, or know how to continue to burn and grit it through. It's really crazy.
Right.
So let me switch it around for you just a little bit here, Beth. And unfortunately, I know the answer, but have you?
Why are you asking?
Well, because everybody out there understands the answer. Okay, it's not just for you or me, as much as I want it to be. So the thing I want to ask you is, have you had a situation where you had to make a decision where, no, I'm not going to continue to go down this road, and I'm going to pivot, or I'm going to fail, and it's time for me to go in a different direction? And what was some of the thinking that went along behind that?
Wow, that's a good question. Yeah, there's a really very difficult place I remember being in with you. In fact, it was with our software company, and I remember we were in a really tight spot, and I knew that depending on how I handled a particular situation, that it was going to get way worse or it was going to stay the same. And I chose way worse, because to me, staying the same was not going to resolve the situation. I was willing to just go in and just throw down the gauntlet, so to speak. And it did get worse. It got to be really bad, really difficult for both of us. But in retrospect, I would count that as a victory for me, because it ultimately led to a lot more significant change that we knew we needed to make, and just kind of doing the same old wasn't going to work. And so I think that was a moment of true grit for me, because it was very scary. I don't know if I comfortably say it was courageous, but I know felt like I was looking over the precipice, and I didn't really like what I saw down below in the canyon. So, but I also knew that there was no going back. So that was a tough space. But I also think that it was a decision that ultimately enabled us to move forward in a lot better ways.
I don't think we'd be with You Can Choose if we hadn't made that choice. So really what you did is you had a choice between staying the course, just kind of grading it out, if you will, because some parts of it were pleasant, but some of it wasn't pleasant, or to make a change, and that the results of that change would either be much better or much worse.
All right.
And you decided to go ahead and make that change. So that was a situation.
I would say the percentages were in my favor of going much worse, but I knew I had to make a change. So.
Great. Okay. So Rusty, I don't know if you have a story, anything like that, but I'm sure you've had your fair share of choices that you've had to make where you decided to go one way or the other. And how did that work for you?
Yeah, I think that when I think about this idea of grit and failing fast, and all that we almost see it as one or the other, right? It's like, well, either you're going to tough it out or you're going to fail. And I don't know that it really is they're so separate in that way. And I really liked what Beth said about, to some extent, it takes some grit, it takes some strength, some courage, some persistence to make difficult decisions. All along the way as an entrepreneur, I starting my own business, I'm making all sorts of little decisions every day about, I'm going to keep doing this, I'm going to stop doing this, I'm going to try this, do this other thing. And some things work and some things don't. So that's part of the journey. But I do want to go back to this, I guess what I heard Beth, you talking about is this idea of failure, and what do we get from that? Even if we consider it a failure. And I look at, for example, my marriage ended in divorce, and I saw that as a massive failure in my life. And I learned a ton out of that process. And just like I heard you just a minute ago, Peter, say, you guys wouldn't have started You Can Choose if you hadn't had that situation where you were staring over the precipice and you came through that. I wouldn't be here either today if it weren't for the process I went through about getting divorced and everything I learned through that process. And so what we can call it failure, but I think in a way, we do ourselves a disservice by putting that word failure on it. Even when we talk about fail fast, like it's still a colloquial thing that gets talked about a lot in Silicon Valley, but it's still, the word failure has a weight to it that most people don't like. And being able to take that experience, you're not going to change what actually happened, but you can change your relationship to it. Mm-hmm. And you can say, what did I learn from that experience? And yes, it was difficult and rigorous and challenging and all of these other things. And look how I grew and changed as a person because of that experience.
So Rusty, would you say that maybe a better way to say it is to learn fast instead of fail fast? I mean,
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And the learning comes through sometimes challenging situations, and that's okay.
Well, and actually, I think I won't say it only comes through challenging situations, but when you're actually faced with a decision or something that doesn't go your way, you have to spend so much more focus, so much more energy on that, and that's when the creativity goes about as well. Then they say that necessity is the mother of invention, right? When you get up against the wall and you're trying to figure out a way to do something, that's when the sparks of creativity come alive and you try to make something happen. So sometimes you have to, whether you call it fail, whether you learn, it's a stretch from my mind, or pivot or whatever you're doing out there, you come to a point where you decide, well, this isn't working for me anymore. I need to make a decision. And it goes back to what we talked about, was it last week, which was about courage, right? The courage, the fear that's associated with failure is incredible. And to have the courage to do something about that. So that's why, I just encourage everybody else out there to listen into all these things, because they are related to what it takes to be a successful leader, even if it's just a leader for yourself. So this is a tougher question. So for both of you, I'll start with you, Rusty. So is there anything you're working on now, right? You talked about your divorce and you certainly made a decision when you left Apple, but is there anything you're working on now that you're thinking, is this working for me the way that I want it to? Do I keep plugging away? Do I continue to maintain that grit? Or is it time for me to pivot or fail fast or make a change? Is there anything that you're thinking about at this time? And think about it yourself. That's what I'm going to be asking you next.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Peter. I think about that all the time. Part of as someone who's not been at this for very long, just about a year, part of where I continue to learn is how do I continue to engage people in a way that's going to be most supportive and effective for them. And I'm always thinking about that and reflecting on it. Is that something that I do locally, meetup groups? I also do speaking around here to networking groups in the Bay Area, business groups, that kind of thing, small business associations. Is it online marketing? Is it LinkedIn? Is it one-on-one? Is it groups? So I'm always looking at that whole spectrum of activities and saying, where do I want to put my time? And as someone who's worked in corporate roles for 25 years, this is my first venture as an entrepreneur. And I really am living this whole experience, which you guys know well, about focus. You can't do it all, right? I was like, I don't have a whole organization behind me. I don't have a team working with me the way I've had for much of my career. So I got to be really clear about where am I going to put my focus? And so I'm always evaluating that. And there's always a fear of missing out. It's like, well, gosh, if I stop doing local events like a lunch and learn, I actually did that today. I had a lunch and learn with Meetup. And it was great. We had a great discussion. We had a good group of people, really nice connections. And I'm thinking about stopping doing that. And then all the fear comes up. Oh my gosh, well, what am I going to miss out on? And so it's I'm the same as everybody else as we go through these things, and I just get to apply these same tools. Well, why am I doing this? Why is it important to me? And, is there some other activity that I would rather be investing my time and energy in? And just work through the fear, because that's part of the journey.
Yeah. Well, and I guess to build on what you just said, Rusty, I think anybody, whether you're starting a company or starting a new job or you're starting a new life, I mean, something new that's not known, if you will, I think you always have that element of fear or what if. And I think the thing that's really important is to keep out in front of you what it is that you really want. What is that goal, if that's what it is, or what is it you'd like to achieve in some sense? I mean, you can have material things as signs that you've achieved things, but that I've found tends to not really answer what you want here in terms of an achievement. So I think every day when you go through a to-do list, if you will, and if you've got 10 things you absolutely need to do, but there's really only 3 you really want to do, those are the things that I think you focus on doing. I mean, some of the other stuff maybe eventually you need to do, but maybe not right in the moment. And I found that that helps me start to figure out what to do if I've got a bunch of things, in fact, too many things to do, and just allowing that to, I guess, percolate a little bit to see what really boils to the top in terms of what's really important. Where do I have the energy? Where am I getting the sense of what I should be doing? And I think to your FOMO point, fear of missing out, that tends to overcome that issue of, you know, oh my gosh, I'm missing out here, I should be doing that. That really helps me to balance that kind of thing, because I've learned that you can't do it all, first off. And I would say, secondly, you don't even know what it all is to reinforce it. But if you're doing what you really want to do and something you're inspired to do something, that's really the way I try to help people think about where to move forward with.
So are you saying that there isn't like a magic set of logic that you can use to figure out whether to fail fast or to continue to work through it?
Yes.
There's
no logic. No, there is no logic to answer. So no, I guess we agreed then. No, there isn't, because I think every person, first off, is different. Every circumstance is different. And so you have to make that choice for yourself. And that's why listening to what you have to say is so important, because what I have to say may have absolutely no relevance. In fact, it probably has no relevance. It's only what you think that counts.
Sure.
Yeah.
Rusty?
Well, I like that. And I think it goes back to this conversation we had about why are you doing the things you're doing, right? As long as it's, because what's meaningful to me may not be meaningful to you, Peter, or to you, Beth. And that's why I think there's no logic. There's no set of rules. And that's where so many of us who have grown up in the business world, that's a huge stumbling block, because we tend to approach problems with the rational pros and cons and what's the ROI and all of this analytical kind of approach. And when it comes down to some of these decisions, doesn't have that same level of analytics behind it. It's more as what Beth was saying. How am I feeling about this? Is this resonating with me or is this not resonating with me? And what am I going to do with that?
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges too, particularly for folks who are in a more technical role where you do have a lot of analytics or data to deal with, it's harder to step back from that when you're making choices that have no real technical aspect or something that you could logically infer. And I think that's a real a challenge for those individuals, but I also think it's the real opportunity too, because if you're really open to, I mean, yeah, you need to have a certain level of logic in terms of whether things actually make sense for you or not, but to actually make the right decision, whether it's a personal decision or a work-related decision or something that you have absolutely no clue, that's where you really have to pay attention to what you're thinking and what you're feeling, because that's going to give you the best guidance of absolutely anything out there, period.
And I'd love to just add one piece onto that, which is from my own personal experience, it was a huge stumbling block because I thought there was a right and a wrong decision. And there's no right and wrong in most of these things, especially all the scenarios, Beth, that you were just laying out. There is no right and wrong. But I was afraid of making the wrong choice. And we're talking about failure here in the world today, right?
Yeah.
And that wrong choice felt like it would be a failure. But even if in the end it turns out not to have been the optimal choice, all that is learning. It's learning, it's feedback, it's experience, it's growth. When I still chuckle at this, when I was in my young 20s in one of my first jobs, I thought I was qualified to be, I started entry level, but I thought I was qualified to be director, VP, whatever it was. I know how to do this. This is easy. And now I look back at those days and I say, I may have known a lot of the analytical pieces. I may have been smart, but I didn't have the life experience. I didn't have the wisdom, the knowledge of how to navigate different situations. I just didn't have that experience. And we gain that through failure. Some of these difficult experiences that we talk about as failure, that's how we learn these things.
Well, and I call that the worst kind of ignorance, is you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
When you're young, you can't know it because you haven't had the experiences yet, that you just don't have that perspective. And I think that's something that unfortunately is not really shared or discussed out there in a broad way, because that's where I think your failures become really, really valuable, because you can't just be an entrepreneur. You have to go through a lot of stuff, if you will. And some of that's not very pleasant stuff. But how do you quantify that? You can't. And I think that's why it's so important to pay attention to who you are and why you want it. So
great. So we're going to start wrapping things up here a little bit, but I do want to make one point or tap on one point that you mentioned, Rusty, the importance of that there really is no quote unquote absolute right answer, right? It's like what we talk about is the difference between the relative and the absolute, right? Whether it's and there is no absolute right or absolute wrong. It's all relative. It's relative. Maybe it's relative to this week or this month or this job or this situation. But if you, like the situation that Beth and I had many years ago, where we made the wrong choice, if you will, because it ended up being very difficult for us. But if you look at it from the vantage point of where we are today, it was the absolute right choice to make. So the absoluteness of a decision is left to be decided. That's for sure.
And by the way, you can reevaluate that. So, T-1 month after making that decision, it just got worse and worse. But hey, now T-3-4 years, wow, it was like a huge winner. So it's almost like you have to have a perceived failure in order to have ultimate success. So it's very interesting.
Okay, so one last question, and I'll summarize it up here at the end here. One last question for both of you is there anything that you would give to our listeners out there about making a choice? So put yourself in their perspective, right? They're listening us. They probably found us through LinkedIn. They're at a job, or they're at a thinking about doing a startup, or maybe they're in a startup. And they're kind of in a position where, gosh, what do I do? What if you could give them just a bit of coaching? And I know you charge for your coaching services, is like we charge for our coaching services. But what would you give them that would be worth helping them? Excuse me, not worth helping them to make a decision, Rusty.
What I was thinking about earlier in this conversation is a choice that we all have to make. And whenever we're facing a decision, whenever we're facing some kind of circumstance or situation in front of us, we can choose to look at it from a fear kind of perspective. And that's all the things that could go wrong, making the wrong choice, all of that. Or we can choose to look at it from a belief perspective. And the belief is, what if everything is going to work out? What if I have everything that I need to create the success that I have in my mind right now? And hold that belief and hold that understanding, because it's true. Each one of us does. Each one of us has what we need to create that life, to move forward and take the steps that we envision and create the life that we're envisioning. But we get to choose where we want to put our focus. And when we focus on the fear, we're naturally going to be drawn to that. That's one of the things that they always tell race car drivers is your car goes where you're looking. So if there's an accident, don't look at the accident. Look at where you want to go, because naturally you're going to steer in that direction. And it's the exact same thing in our lives. If we choose to focus on the fear, we're going to amplify that and create more of it. And if we choose to focus on the belief, we're going to amplify that and create more of that.
Perfect. That's and it's so true. You look at the highway and you get people always gawking to look at what's going on beside them. They're focused on things that they don't want, which causes not an accident, but it does in this case cause a traffic jam out there. So Beth, what do you think about how would you help somebody who's listening in to us today and helping them to make a decision to keep plugging away or shift?
So I'll build on what Rusty said, because I think he points out the fact that you can look at what you want and then choose to avoid it because you're afraid you're not going to make it or be successful in whatever sense it is, or you can choose to go forward because you believe in yourself and you'll be successful. And that is, I think, the choice that you make. I mean, it can go either way. You can fail or you can succeed. I think it's really your choice as to what you want. And so paying attention to what it is you really want to achieve, and then I would go a step farther and go to the why you want it, because that's where you get the energy that's going to sustain you over time, especially when you get to those difficult spots. Because those moments when you feel like you're all by yourself, you know everybody's abandoned you, or it feels like that, that's when you have what I call true grit. I mean, not after the movie necessarily, but that's what, to me, what grit really refers to, is when you're by yourself in that dark room and there's like, you feel like you have no resources and you make those choices, that's really where you find you will have success. And I think that it's important, because when you truly are familiar with who you are and what it is you want, then you will be a success. You almost won't fail, because if you're a success, then I guess by definition you're not a failure.
There you go. Perfect. All right, so here's a summary of what we talked about today, right? The three key takeaways, right? You can have grit and still fail fast, right? They're not mutually exclusive. It's an opportunity as you go through your day, your week, your month, whatever it is you're working on. You can think about both things, right? Am I putting in the effort? Am I doing this? Or am I also thinking about ways that I can make a shift, right? Another really powerful message we talked about today is to reframe failure as feedback, right? Look at the way that maybe things didn't work out well. You had a bad meeting, you didn't get the promotion you were looking for or something. Use that as feedback. What is that telling you? And as Beth was saying before, the importance of both Rusty and Beth. How does it impact your beliefs, and how does it impact your heart? How does that make you feel? What messages are there for you? Don't have to get too bogged down in the logic piece. Listen to yourself to make it happen. And the third thing, which came out really strong today, is understand why. Understand why you're making the choice that you are. The choice in and of itself is important, but not nearly as important as why you're making that choice. What's behind it? What is your motivation? What are you hoping to accomplish? And how are you being driven? So looking at those three things, right, you can help to make a little better decisions about whether to grit it through or fail fast, or maybe another way to look at it is learn fast, as Beth said, right? So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. It's been wonderful to be here in front of you. And don't forget, next week, we've got another exciting adventure. The three of us will be talking again. And next time we'll be talking about the power of your networking, right? So thank you very much and have a great day.